They call me a code monkey. I made them lose $50 million. They used to call me the problem guy. Not in the way you'd think, not like I was a troublemaker. It was a nickname born of a desperate, almost reverent respect. Because in the chaotic, duct-taped-together world of our startup, I was the only one who could navigate the labyrinthine mess of spaghetti code that powered our entire operation. I was the guy they called when the digital sky was falling. I was the guy who, with a few keystrokes and a gallon of cheap coffee, could single-handedly keep the whole precarious enterprise from imploding. My journey into this world of digital firefighting began, as so many Silicon Valley stories do, with a Craigslist ad. I was a senior in community college, hungry for experience, and the ad was a masterpiece of minimalist desperation. Need someone who codes, was all it said. No mention of languages, frameworks, or experience. Just a raw, primal need for someone who could speak the language of machines. The interview was held in a cramped, stuffy garage, the air thick with the smell of stale pizza and unbridled ambition. Across a rickety folding table sat three guys who looked like they had just stepped out of the Stanford MBA program catalog. Brad, the charismatic, fast-talking CEO. Mike, the CTO, who, I would soon learn, couldn't actually write a line of code to save his life. And Jessica, the CFO, who seemed to be in a perpetual state of high-strung anxiety. They had an idea, a revolutionary concept for peer-to-peer marketplace transactions that they were convinced would change the world. They also had a problem. They had burned through 5 different developers in the past year, all of whom had, in their words, flaked out. The reality, I would soon discover, was that these developers hadn't flaked. They had fled, screaming, from the digital hellscape that was their codebase. It was a nightmare, a Frankenstein's monster of stitched-together technologies. There were fragments of React clumsily mixed with ancient jQuery, no documentation to speak of, and variable names that read like a descent into madness. Thing 1, stuff underscore new, final underscore 2. It was the digital equivalent of a crime scene, a monument to the rage quits of my predecessors. Can you fix this? Brad asked, his voice a mixture of hope and desperation. He pointed to an error screen on his laptop, a bug that had been crashing their entire platform every 3 hours, like clockwork for the past month. I took a look. 40 minutes later, it was fixed. They hired me on the spot, their relief so palpable it was almost a physical force in the room. The first 6 months were a blur of frantic coding, late nights, and the kind of camaraderie that only comes from being in the trenches together. It was in its own strange, dysfunctional way, beautiful. I was their hero, their digital wizard. When I single-handedly prevented a catastrophic crash during a high-stakes investor demo, they celebrated me with a lavish Korean barbecue feast. Brad, his face flushed with champagne and victory, raised a toast. To Daniel, he declared, his voice ringing with genuine gratitude. The real MVP. Without this guy, we would be absolutely nothing. Jessica, the CFO, literally wept with relief when I managed to recover 3 months of critical financial data they were certain had been lost forever, a digital ghost resurrected from the ether. Mike, the non-coding CTO, would parade me around the garage, calling me a genius and a rock star in front of anyone who would listen. My reputation spread through the small, incestuous world of the company like a myth. I was the fixer. The sales team, bypassing all official channels, would text me directly at all hours of the day and night when a client's account was acting up. The marketing department would sidle up to my desk with pleading eyes, begging me to just take a quick look at their broken analytics integration. The customer service reps, a rotating cast of beleaguered college students, had my personal cell phone number for emergencies, a term which they applied to everything from a minor UI glitch to a user forgetting their password. I became the company's secret weapon, the ace up their sleeve they would whisper about to potential investors. "We have this guy," Brad would say in hushed, conspiratorial tones, "this kid from community college. He can solve literally any technical problem you throw at him. He's incredible." By the second year, the weight of the entire company's technical infrastructure rested squarely on my shoulders. I was no longer a single developer. I was an entire, sleep-deprived engineering department. My 40-hour work weeks became a distant, laughable memory, replaced by a relentless cycle of 60, 80, and then 90-hour weeks. The lines between my life and my work blurred, then disappeared entirely. I was deploying critical patches at 3 in the morning while Brad was posting Instagram stories from the neon-drenched chaos of Burning Man. I was debugging a catastrophic payment gateway failure during Thanksgiving dinner while the founding team was on a leadership retreat in Turkey, their social media feeds a curated gallery of hot air balloons and exotic landscapes. My diet consisted of a steady stream of energy drinks and gas station sushi, my car becoming a mobile command center where I would fix production bugs from my phone while parked outside family gatherings. They kept me going, kept me tethered to this insane, unsustainable pace with a single, tantalizing promise: equity. Once we closed our series of funding, You're getting a real stake in this, man, Brad would say, his hand clasped on my shoulder. You're employee number 4. You're going to be rich. After the Series A came and went, the promise was deferred. After Series B, for sure. We're just finalizing the cap table. Then it was pushed again. Right before the C round, I promise. We're going to make you a millionaire. And I, a naive 24-year-old who still believed in the meritocratic fairy tale of Silicon Valley, I believe them. I believed that my hard work, my sacrifice, my unwavering loyalty would be rewarded. I was a fool. The promises of equity, which had once been my driving force, slowly soured into a cruel, running joke that I wasn't in on. The tone of their praise began to shift, a subtle but unmistakable curdling of respect into condescension. They would introduce me to new investors, no longer as their MVP, but as Daniel, our little helper from community college. Then, in the same breath, they would be frantically texting me under the table when their live demo inevitably crashed and burned. At company parties, the story of my hiring became a well-worn anecdote they would tell with a theatrical, self-congratulatory air, casting themselves as benevolent saviors who had rescued a diamond in the rough. We gave him his first real job, Jessica would say, her words slightly slurred by her third glass of wine, her tone dripping with a patronizing pity. He didn't even go to a real school. But the moment a server went down, the moment a critical bug appeared, my phone would explode with a familiar, frantic chorus of texts. Emergency, Daniel, please respond. The site is down. This is your only priority. Drop everything. We need you now. The mask of condescension would fall away, revealing the raw, desperate need that lay beneath. I was their helper, their charity case, until something broke. Then, and only then, was I their savior. The moment of my disillusionment, the moment the scales finally, irrevocably fell from my eyes, was as quiet and anticlimactic as a death. We were in the final stages of filing for our IPO, the culmination of 3 years of my life's work. I sent Brad a simple, direct message on Slack. Hey, with the IPO coming up, can we finally formalize my equity agreement? His response came a few minutes later. It was a single, laughing emoji. I stared at it, my blood turning to ice. A follow-up message appeared. Dude, you were never technically an employee. You're a contractor. No equity for contractors. That's standard policy, man. Sorry for the confusion. Confusion. 3 years of explicit, repeated promises, dismissed as a simple confusion. The next day, an all-hands meeting, they officially announced the IPO. The company, a company I had single-handedly kept alive, was valued at $500 million. My 1%, the theoretical stake they had dangled in front of me like a carrot for 3 long years, would have been worth $5 million. Instead, my reward came in the form of a $500 performance bonus and a lukewarm, greasy pizza party in the break room. Brad stood at the front of the room, a bottle of cheap champagne in his hand, and gave a rousing speech about how everyone in that room had contributed to their incredible success. He looked directly at me, his eyes passing over me as if I were a piece of furniture, and he didn't even blink. That night, I went home to my small, one-bedroom apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the boisterous, self-congratulatory celebration I had just left. I opened my laptop and looked at the code, the hundreds of thousands of lines of code I had written, rewritten, and painstakingly maintained for 3 years. Every function, every module, every critical system that powered their $500 million empire had my digital fingerprints all over it. And scattered throughout that code, hidden in plain sight, were the little insurance policies I had planted over the years. They weren't malicious, not in their intent. They were dead man's switches, elegant little pieces of logic I had built during those lonely 3 a.m. debugging sessions. They were commented out with innocuous-looking notes, disguised as standard error handling, little time bombs that were set to trigger under a very specific, very unlikely set of circumstances. The day of the IPO was a media circus. The New York Stock Exchange opening bell ceremony was a spectacle of manufactured triumph. CNBC was there, broadcasting live. TechCrunch had a dedicated live blog. Brad, dressed in a comically ill-fitting suit, rang the opening bell at precisely 9:30 a.m. Confetti cannons exploded. Champagne corks popped. The stock opened at $47 a share. At 9:31 a.m., every single function in our codebase, from the user authentication system to the payment processing gateway, simultaneously and elegantly returned the exact same error, equity not found. The site didn't just crash, it became a digital monument to their betrayal. That single, 2-word message was displayed on every page, every app screen, every API response. The stock price, which had been soaring just moments before, began to plummet. Investors, seeing the cryptic message and the catastrophic failure, panicked. The new, highly paid engineering team, the one they had hired with their fancy degrees from real schools, was completely and utterly baffled. They couldn't find the source of the error. They couldn't figure out how to fix it. My phone rang 17 times in the space of 10 minutes. I let go to voicemail. By the time the market closed, the company had lost over $50 million in valuation. Brad was on Bloomberg, his face a mask of apoplectic rage, screaming about cyber terrorism and malicious sabotage. The board of directors, their own fortunes now significantly lighter, launched an emergency investigation. That's when I sent the screenshots. 3 years of their private Slack messages, a curated collection of their greed and condescension, delivered to the inboxes of every major tech journalist in the country. Just keep the code monkey thinking he'll get equity until the IPO. Daniel actually thinks he's getting shares. LOL. It's incredible how much free labor we get out of him. Thank God he's too stupid to know his own worth. And my personal favorite, a message from Brad to Mike. I told him next quarter again. Bought us 3 more months. He's from community college. What's he going to do? Sue us. I closed my laptop, the soft click echoing in the quiet of my apartment, and I waited. I had a feeling the answer to his question was about to get a whole lot more interesting. The knock on my door came at precisely 2 p.m. the next day. It wasn't the frantic, panicked pounding I had expected. It was 3 sharp, professional raps that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. I peered through the peephole and saw a man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, a thick manila envelope clutched in his hand. A process server. I opened the door. He asked if I was Daniel, and when I nodded, he simply handed me the papers, his expression a mask of bored indifference. The stack was heavy in my hands, a dense, 50-page testament to the war that had just been declared. I signed his little electronic pad, and he left without another word. Back inside, my hands are shaking so badly I could barely read the legal jargon. Breach of contract, computer fraud, trade secret theft. They were suing me for $50 million in damages. $50 million from a guy whose most valuable asset was a 3-year-old laptop. The legal phrases blurred together: malicious intent, coordinated attack, irreparable harm to shareholders. I spent the next hour frantically searching for lawyers who specialized in tech law in the labyrinthine and terrifying world of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Most of the top firms in the city wanted a $5,000 retainer just for an initial consultation, money I simply didn't have. I left a series of rambling, desperate voicemails, my voice cracking with a fear I couldn't conceal. An hour later, a miracle. The office of a lawyer named Conrad Donovan called me back. His assistant said he had read the news stories about the IPO crash and was intrigued. He could see me the next morning at 9. I spent the entire night in a caffeine-fueled frenzy, printing out every email, every Slack message, every code commit. I created a meticulous timeline of every broken promise, every late-night emergency call, every condescending remark. My cheap inkjet printer ran out of ink twice, forcing me to make 2 separate, bleary-eyed trips to the 24-hour CVS. The next morning, I walked into Conrad Donovan's office carrying 2 heavy banker's boxes filled with the documented proof of my 3-year ordeal. Conrad was younger than I expected, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that missed nothing. I laid out my entire story, spreading the evidence across his vast conference table. He listened intently, taking copious notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking me to explain a technical concept in layman's terms. When I showed him the Slack messages, the ones where they called me a code monkey and bragged about exploiting me, his eyebrows shot up, but his expression remained unreadable. After 2 hours, he leaned back in his chair and laid out the grim reality. The civil lawsuit, he said, was bad, but potentially survivable. The real problem, the one that could land me in a federal prison, was the potential criminal charges under the CFAA. If Brad and his cronies pushed the cyber terrorism narrative hard enough, the FBI would almost certainly get involved. He told me, in no uncertain terms, that I could be facing 5 to 10 years if a prosecutor could prove I had intentionally caused damage exceeding $5,000. Losing $50 million in market value, he noted dryly, would definitely qualify. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Angelica Crow, the TechCrunch reporter. She needed to verify the authenticity of the Slack screenshots before she could publish her story. Conrad nodded, giving me the green light to take the call. Angelica was all business, grilling me for 3 hours on a video call, forcing me to walk her through the metadata, the server timestamps, the chain of custody for every piece of digital evidence. Her skepticism was a strange comfort. It meant she was a real journalist, not just a sensationalist looking for a quick headline. After the call with Angelica, Conrad's warnings about evidence preservation slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I spent the entire night creating encrypted, redundant backups of everything, documenting every step, changing every password, and enabling 2-factor authentication on every account I owned. The next morning, the company released its official public statement, and my world exploded. They painted me as a disgruntled, rogue contractor who had taken their systems hostage for personal financial gain. They used the words cyber terrorism and malicious attack. My LinkedIn inbox became a toxic waste dump of angry messages from former colleagues and strangers, calling me a criminal, a monster, a disgrace to the tech industry. Recruiters who had been eagerly courting me just a week before suddenly ghosted me. My name, in the small, incestuous world of Silicon Valley, was now poison. The day after that, a FedEx truck delivered another official-looking envelope. It was a demand letter from the company's high-powered law firm, threatening not only the civil litigation, but also a formal criminal referral to the FBI. They gave me 5 business days to respond. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight that left me breathless and terrified. But in the midst of this chaos, a strange thing began to happen. My story, thanks to Angelica's meticulously researched article, had gone viral. And my inbox, once a repository of hatred, began to fill with messages of a different kind. Messages of support. Messages of solidarity. Stories from other developers, other contractors, other code monkeys who had been chewed up and spit out by the very same startup machine. A former developer from the company, one of the 5 who had rage quit before me, sent me a detailed account of how Brad had made him the exact same empty promises of equity. He offered to provide a sworn statement for my case. Another person sent screenshots of Brad making those same promises to other contractors. The evidence was mounting. This wasn't just about me. This was their business model. Conrad and I, armed with this new ammunition, went on the offensive. We filed a whistleblower complaint with the SEC, detailing how the company had lied to its investors about the true state of its technology, claiming to have a robust engineering team when, in reality, it was just me, holding the entire digital empire together with caffeine and desperation. A few days later, Conrad received an email from the company's lawyers. They were suggesting a mutually beneficial resolution. They would consider offering me immunity from prosecution if I helped them fix the system, which was, apparently, still plagued by the equity not found error. Conrad saw it for the trap. It was a clumsy attempt to get me to admit, on the record, that I had intentionally sabotaged their code. The real breakthrough came when I unearthed my original 3-year-old contractor agreement. It was filled with arbitration clauses, something Brad had likely insisted on to avoid costly public lawsuits. Conrad laughed when he saw it. Arbitration, he explained, was our silver lining. It meant this entire battle would be fought not in a public courtroom, but behind the closed doors of a private mediator. They couldn't use a public trial to destroy my reputation. The first settlement offer came a week later. $50,000 and a lifetime NDA. We countered with $800,000, full immunity from criminal charges, and back pay for 3 years of unpaid overtime. The negotiations were a grueling, week-long war of attrition. But they were desperate. Their stock price was still in the toilet. Their investors were furious. And their own engineering team was admitting they didn't understand half the code I had written. We finally settled at $400,000, a letter of immunity, and a carefully worded agreement that allowed me to speak about general industry practices without ever mentioning their name. The day after we signed the papers, I spent 10 hours on a supervised, recorded screen share, walking their shell-shocked engineers through the labyrinth of my code, showing them the triggers, the backups, the workarounds, the ghosts in their own machine. One of them, a kid fresh out of Stanford, had the decency to apologize, to admit he had no idea what I'd been dealing with all those years. A month later, Brad quietly resigned. My life began to find a new, quieter rhythm. I started a new contract gig with a different startup, one run by an engineer who understood and respected the work. The pay was fair, the hours were reasonable, and every task had a clear, written scope. I started therapy to unpack the years of workplace trauma. And one night, I went to bed at a normal hour, my phone on silent. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep without the fear of a 3 a.m. emergency call, without the phantom glow of an error message burned onto the back of my eyelids. I was no longer the problem guy. I was just Daniel. And for the first time in a very long time, that was more than enough.